Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Personality is who you are not. That was a phrase, a statement that Dr. Beatrice Chestnut and Aranio Pius told us as workshop attendees at a recent workshop we just finished this past week. Attending, we went to 5 days of an Enneagram inner growth workshop, inner work workshop. And, you know, this is experiential. And when I say 5 days, I don't mean just like, 9 to 5 with tons of breaks. There were many breaks, but we started at 8:30 in the morning and we'd go till 7 o'clock at night and have an hour break for lunch every day for 5 days straight.
It was intense.
And there were about, 30 people in the workshop, and each person got to take two primary times, one 10 to 15-minute experience where they shared some personal stories, and then another 30 to 45-minute experience where they were able to express something was going on in their life emotionally, relationally, with their personality, something. And Beatrice and Aranio would do some inner work with each of the attendees, including myself and Antonia. And there were about 4 other profiler training students from our profiler training group that also came and attended alongside of us. It was intense, it was incredible, and it was experiential. It's hard to explain it. We're going to attempt to explain some of the things here, but it's hard to explain it with words because it is such an encounter with an experience of self, and a community experience with other people also encountering themselves, which is so powerful to watch because I'm a Enneagram 6, for example, and there were other Enneagram 6s there, and we did our work together. We'd each do a separate work, but we were all up in front at the same time. So as other 6s were working on themselves and going through their changes and their ahas and their inner work, I was getting to benefit from that, and they were getting to benefit from mine. And so each type got to benefit from other people of that same type. So it was so much power. And the way that Beatrice and Aranio approach their inner work, if you ever get a chance to go to one of their workshops, I definitely recommend it. It is so body-based and visceral. It's such an experience because they really move us from the head and the thoughts and the abstractions of personality into the embodiment of personality.
I don't know if they do that for every one of their retreats. I think some of them are more conceptual.
Yeah.
This was their inner work retreat, and I believe it's invite only for a reason because you kind of have to be ready for it, you have to be at a place where you're ready to dive deep and go to some scary places. Well,
it's been a few days since we got back, and I think I'm still recovering because I had a lot of emotional shifts in all of this. And you're right. This is different than they also teach like more personality stuff. But when they said the comment, personality is who you are not, we've referenced this before. I think this time around, it wasn't just in my head, a cognitive understanding. It was a sense of that. Because, for example, my Enneagram type of type 6, the core emotion is fear. And it shows up in different ways for different 6s, depending on your subtype, because there's 3 different subtypes as well. And what actually is showing up there is an avoidance of what my true essence is as a 6, which is the most courageous of all the 9 Enneagram types. 6s have incredible amounts of courage, fearlessness, and the ability to go into the world and make things happen with intensity and courageousness. And so my personality of looking at the fear and anxieties that I might exhibit in my life, well, that's really not who I am. That's my personality. And it became really clear to me because I've seen like people online doing, videos like how Enneagram types go to a party. And I'm like, that immediately after this experience became absurd to me because you're doubling down in these kinds of things, attaching to the very thing you're not by identifying with this type so much. And I realized, man, that is a powerful reframe inside my own mind. I don't want to reinforce being an Enneagram 6. Yes, I'm an Enneagram 6, but that means that those things I want to attach to, like the fear, anxieties, I don't want to continue to reinforce that to myself. I actually want to move away from that. That's not who I am. Yeah. That's not my true essence.
Yeah, and I suspect that this is part of the journey of just understanding type. There's crossover here to Myers-Briggs too. There's like a version of this over on the Myers-Briggs side, which we can hop over to in a moment. But that idea that personality is what we're not, they just recently released a book, and each of the chapters, and it's I think it's called The Enneagram's Guide to Waking Up.
Yeah.
Each of the chapters talks about the paradoxes of the type, which is effectively that whatever the type descriptions are around your Enneagram type, it is effectively the opposite of what you are meant to be in essence. So you just mentioned 6. 6 is passion, or the emotional, sort of vice is fear. And the opposite of that is courage. And the paradox is that you're trapped in this place of fear and anxiety when really your essence is the most courageous of all. As a 3, this look like, so self-deceit is the challenge of 3s, and veracity is the virtue that a 3 is going toward. But at the end of the day, what ends up manifesting is that 3s are constantly in motion, constantly doing, right? They're human doings, because they're trying to be something. They're trying to project something to the outside world that will be acceptable. They're way too tapped into other people's opinions of them. And so even the self-preservation 3s, which are the least aware that they're doing it, but that's fundamentally what it is that you're trying to get other people to believe something about you in order to deal with the fact that you don't really have much of an identity on your own without that feedback. So self-deceit becomes a major issue. But 3s, at the end of the day, are the most human beings, not human doings. Like at the end, like if you're a 3 and you're completely in essence, you're with yourself. There is no self-deceit. There's only being with the self and understanding the value and the preciousness of yourself without all of the feedback that you're doing such a great job or you're doing this, do. And they walked around the model and talked about how each of the types around the symbol have this. Like 9s are the most powerful, and 1s are some of the most quirky and sort of idiosyncratic and chill of the types. Like they're just sort of rested into their weirdness and their idiosyncrasy, and they don't have to be perfect or show up in a certain way. 2s have some of the best boundaries and understand relationships, not in a way where they're constantly trying to help others, but they have really powerful boundaries. 3s are the most human beings as opposed to human doings. 4s are the least envious, right? Because envy is their challenge, but 4s are actually the most complete in and of themselves. They understand their worth and value in and of itself the most. 5s are some of the most energetic. That's one of the challenge of 5s. Is 5s has this feeling like they have to be, what is the word that they use?
Avarice,
right? 5s are about avariciousness, however it's said. And it's generally about energy, right? They met out their energy very carefully, and they don't have any energy for any of the things they don't want to do. And if you see a 5 focused on something they want, all of a sudden their energy is boundless. Well, in essence, they have boundless energy. And 6, like you mentioned, are the most courageous. 7s are the most present, because that's the challenge of 7, right? Is to not be there. 7s are the most present. And 8s, it's innocence and vulnerability and kind of a sweetness. And they are the most that way. They're the most innocent and not vulnerable to... I had somebody push back on Twitter when I talked about this. They were like, vulnerable sounds terrible as an 8. And I'm like, no, it's not vulnerable to the elements. It's not like you're a sitting duck. It's that you're emotionally vulnerable. That it's really actually about emotional honesty and innocence. And they're the most that way. So personality is effectively a description of what your essence isn't. But in a 180 degrees way, in a complete direct polarity opposite, that the ways that you're trapped in personality, your essence is not trapped there at all.
Yeah, and I would encourage you, if you are someone that's more advanced, that's creating content or talking about the Enneagram, I think our encouragement to you is please make sure, I mean, it can be fun to create in the world of over-identifying with types, but please make sure that you include in your message that this is really kind of what we want to get away from. We don't want to keep doubling down on this. And I think that we as thought leaders and as type leaders, if you see yourself as one that creates content in the world, you can do a great service to people by giving them a roadmap. Yeah, you can identify where you're starting from, and it can be fun and clever and funny, like a little YouTube video about how type 6s show up with anxiety. That can be cool. But also, I would encourage you, can you weave in a message of, and that doesn't stop there. It's not who you are. This might be some of the behavior and how you're identifying right now, but really being a 6 is so much more than that. It's so much different. In fact, it's the opposite of how we tend to identify with the types. So whatever type you're talking about in the Enneagram, that's my encouragement to you as a thought leader and someone that talks about this.
That's an interesting idea, because when it comes to personality typology systems, that's the first, that's like the entry point is identification.
That's right.
Right? Like I find out I'm a sexual 3 and I read everything about it and I go, oh my gosh, that's so me. Or I discover I'm my best fit type is ENTP in Myers-Briggs, and I read all this stuff around being an ENTP and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. And so I think that first phase into it is identification. And sometimes those like funny, like the articles or listicles or sort of the funny videos on YouTube that you see, those help in diagnosing one's type, because they illustrate what each of these types look like in all these different contexts. And you go, oh, okay, I guess that's me because I really identify with how ENCPs are showing up at a party or whatever. And so I think those can be helpful in the very beginning. I think what you're trying to say, though, is there's a progression that happens.
The law of diminishing returns if you only stay with that.
Right, because at a certain point, the work of identification is complete. That work being, I give myself permission to be me. Because the first thing is, oh, I'm wired differently than other people. Oh, I show up a little different. Okay, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I guess I do. Oh, that's why I've had such difficult conversations with my fill in the blank, right? My mother, father, siblings, coworkers, boss, blah, 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 partner. And so that identification piece is really important for giving oneself permission to be oneself. And then, of course, it extends to others. Once you give yourself permission to be yourself, now you extend that same thing to other people and go, oh, I guess they get permission to be themselves as well. That all happens in identification. That all happens in that first phase. And that's good. And lots of great work can happen in identification. You can iron out relationship challenges. You can find a career path that suits you. You can create an ergonomic lifestyle that suits how you're naturally wired. Lots of great stuff can happen in identification. But if identification is where the person stops and they just live in that space, I think this is one of the reasons why people say, oh, I'm totally past all of that. Because they get to, like you mentioned, there's a law of diminishing returns. And at a certain point, that identification and sometimes over-identification with type, you start to feel how limiting it is. You start to feel like, oh, this is a box. Oh, I put myself in a box. Unfortunately, then we blame the tool. We go, oh, personality typology systems put people in a box, not realizing that was actually our relationship to the system. The system itself doesn't put anybody in anything. The system is, both of these systems, I would argue, both Enneagram and Myers-Briggs, both of these systems are not intended to trap you there. They're intended to give you a point of origin, a you are here dot on the map. And if you use these systems with skill, if you understand their original intent, and this includes Myers-Briggs as well, Enneagram is actually intended to be an ego transcendence tool, right? Or a system.
Yeah.
It's intended to tell you, like you said, what you are not. When navigating from that point of you are here dot, that identification with type, while navigating from that place to essence, there's a lot you can infer in the travel. If you are a 6 and fear is your passion, but you are the most courageous of all the types, now you've got some work to do. Now you know what your work is in order to travel from one to the other. And I would argue that Myers-Briggs is less seen as this kind of system, but the more I'm getting back to the roots of it and the more I'm understanding all the different true applications, it's not Myers-Briggs itself, but Jungian's functions in particular in the book Psychological Types. And I've talked a lot about the archetypes of persona, ego, shadow, self. Don't have to get into all of that, but if you look at all of that element and what Jung was talking about, he was warning against what we've been calling one-sidedness, or what he called one-sidedness, and we've been doing a lot of callback to that. What is one-sidedness? Well, it's an incomplete picture of oneself. It is doubling down on some of these qualities and characteristics that are native wiring to us, that are legitimate, right? The original point of identification. is to go, oh, this is how I'm wired. Okay, now I get it. Now I get why I do what I do. But if a person only ever doubles down on those aspects, they run into the challenge of one-sidedness. And one-sidedness is effectively synthetic limitations a person puts upon themselves. So being an ENTP, I wouldn't communicate it the same way that I would with Enneagram, which is that sexual threes, challenge of self-deceit, and the need to go to veracity. That is what self-deception is. What I am not. It's what I'm trapped in, but it's not what I am. What I am is a human being that can sit with myself and understand myself on a deep level, and my essence does that and helps me do that. Being an ENTP, I wouldn't say is not me. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't put it in the same language, but I would say that most of the most obnoxious descriptions of ENTPs, or descriptions of ENTPs being obnoxious, most of the worst qualities and characteristics of being an ENTP, they all come down to one-sidedness. They come down to a person who is unwilling to stretch themselves and grow past the earliest incarnations of the self. And when an individual discovers a growth path for themselves, usually we say start with the co-pilot, make sure you're spending enough time in your dominator driver in the car model. And by the way, if you're unfamiliar with the car model, I recommend going to personalityhacker.com and looking up that phrase car model in the search engine, and you'll find all sorts of content that will catch you up. But we recommend people start with the driver function, make sure that they've got plenty of opportunities for that, and then really stretch themselves into that co-pilot function or that auxiliary cognitive function. And at that point, the growth path becomes so much clearer, in my opinion. Once you really start doing that and really start to hone in on what that means, then all of a sudden you have to contend with balancing it with your 10-year-old or tertiary function. And then at that point, you kind of go, I don't think this is complete. And then you sort of naturally flow into your inferior or 3-year-old function. And when you've done all of that, you feel how much more opportunity there is out there for you. You feel how much more opportunity there is to become a well-rounded version of your type. So being an ENTP isn't not me, but being the one-sided ENTP, that obnoxious debater, the person who's constantly trying to, get other people's goat in order to spar or to hone their own, sharpen their own sword or whatever it is that they're attempting to do. That's all descriptions of very one-sided ENTPs. And that is not me. I should never identify with that. Or at least if I did my identification with it early, I need to graduate beyond that. I need to go, okay, so ENTPs are in the corner pinning somebody down at a party arguing about Nietzsche. All right, well, I need to not be that kind of ENTP. That should not be my complete self-definition. I need to move beyond that. What does that really look like? And so I think with both of these systems, when they're used at their best, they are actually a starting point, a you are here dot of diagnostic of what must be grown beyond. What comes after that? What's more out there? How do I stretch myself and enter an Enneagram my true essence, or in Myers-Briggs, become not one-sided?
So for me as an Enneagram 6, in the early days of understanding the Enneagram and what 6s are like, I'm a social 6. So there's some characteristics. First of all, anxiety has a big place in my life. It is how I remember things. It's how I motivate myself. It's how I keep track of future events coming. It's how I get projects done. It's how, at least that's what I've told myself, right, as a 6. And when I learned about 6 and that fear is the core passion and anxiety is tethered to that, I was like, well, that gives me a lot of reasons why I do what I do. Okay, that's how I'm wired. I should be doing this because that's who I am. I'm a 6. I've got anxiety. And I gave myself a pass. And anytime somebody would say you should be less anxious, find other strategies, I'm like, well, look, I'm a 6. That's just how I am, right? I just show up this way. I use my anxiety for a lot of stuff. And if I let that go, my primary strategy in the world is going to be deficient. I'm not going to be able to do as many things or accomplish as much. And in looking at the Enneagram and 6, this idea of courage and not having everything planned or thought ahead of, or preventing something bad from happening by making sure I really think about all the possible scenarios and just going and just diving into it head first and just being courageous and knowing it'll work out somehow. That's my path of growth. And what's weird is when I hear the idea that 6s are the most courageous of all the Enneagram types. And I'm like, I'm a 6. I deal with some fear and anxiety sometimes in my life, but man, I'm the most courageous. I hear that and I get excited. I turn that anxiety, because anxiety and excitement are very close. I mean, they're basically just a different narrative to almost the same feeling you have inside yourself. And I start to get excited about what that courage could look like. What possible ways can I stretch that courage and become the most courageous person that I know? And certainly beyond anything I thought was capable of for me. Like, how courageous can I actually be in this life? Because that's my true essence. And when I hear that and I really sit with it and I let go of the anxiety, let go of all the fear, and I just get really present, I realize that, man, I do have a lot of courage. This BS personality thing that's telling me I should fear stuff and be anxious about it, I don't know. That doesn't actually feel as much like me. Because when I turn this other direction, I see that courage in front of me. That really feels like me. That is what I want. That's what I want more in my life. And I bet people around me want it too, because I'm going to show up in an amazing way. And I bet there's a little bit of excitement for each of the types when they understand how they're wired in the Enneagram system, for example. I'm sure we could talk about Myers-Briggs as well, but I'm just talking about Enneagram for a second here. Like you, Antonia, my guess is that when you hear about your true essence, the way you can actually be sitting with who you are, knowing deeply, what you bring to the world in and of yourself, there's probably a little bit of excitement there, and even an unconscious, precog, like, that's kind of where I'm headed. Like, that's where I want to be headed. I like that idea. I think we all have a sense of this in the Enneagram system.
I have to admit there's a sense of disbelief.
Yeah.
Because the work I've done, especially over the last 18 months to 2 years, has been a lot of inner reflection work. And the idea that I would know myself without having self-deceit, by having self-veracity, this idea that I would know myself maybe better than most and understand and have no sense of kidding myself in any way, and just, again, being a human being as opposed to human doing. That all, that feels, there's a piece of me that doesn't fully believe that that's possible for me. I have to admit, like, it feels like a tall order. And it also feels like a siren song. Like you mentioned, there's an excitement to that idea. There's a feeling like that is what I'm supposed to be, but how do I ever get there? And you mentioned something before that is probably a key in all of this, which is that you lose some of your motivation. Like for you, anxiety and that fear has been highly motivating for you throughout your life. And what do you do if you don't have that as a motivation? For me, when I stop giving two craps about what other people think about me, it is much more difficult for me to get motivated to do something if I don't think that I'm like showing up for another person or doing something in behalf of others. It's harder for me to be motivated by my own intrinsic sense of will or, like doing things for me. And that idea of like, what do I even want, right? The self-deceit piece. And I know that I'm a person who talks a lot about transparency and radical honesty. And no wonder, as a 3, these have been, and as an ENTP, these have been very helpful for me. But at the same time, I still know that I have plenty of self-deception inside of me. I know that my relationship to transparency and honesty and truth and radical honesty, I know that that's way more complex than I might advertise. Like, this is not simple. And it's very textured. And I lose some of my motivation. The old tools don't work for me anymore. And I think the other piece of it is that the world does not reward me for doing this work. One of the challenges, and by the way, I've been to multiple of these, this is now a couple inner work retreats around the Enneagram in, and there's not very many 3s that are there. Like I find myself maybe with one other 3 and the two of us are like, yeah, right? Not a lot of 3s. You don't see many 8s.
There's always 9s and 4s from my observation.
And 2s, just so many 2s.
Yeah,
and
9, 2s, and 4s.
4s. Sometimes quite a few 5s. Oftentimes 6s are there, but the 3s and the 8s are like we're usually 1 or 2 of us. And one of the reasons why I think for 3s that makes it particularly difficult is that the world massively rewards me for camouflaging who I am in order to serve them. They love it. The world loves it. And so I get a lot less positive feedback. and a lot less success and achievement and all the things that I have been conditioned to believe are super duper uber important, since the United States is probably a 3 culture. It's most likely a social 3 culture. And so it's tough to go, okay, so I have to renounce all of that and get into a space where I'm not going to be rewarded for my inner work. In fact, I might feel like I'm being punished. And yet I desperately want to know myself in that way. I desperately want to have this sense of inner veracity. I talk about it all the time as an important thing for me, to be transparent and honest and radically honest. And the idea that that could be the center of my essence is incredibly attractive. And all the work between where my starting point was and where I want to go towards essence it's a mountain, right? It's so much. And so I can understand why people kind of hang out in identity, right? They sort of hang out in that space where it's like, this is pretty good. You know, I'm leveraging my relationships, got a better career for me. I think it's done what it's supposed to do. And also there's so much more on the other side. That's, like you mentioned about the event, it's experiential. It's hard to put into words what happens when you get on the other side of all of this. When you get to the other side of being trapped in these self-imposed limitations, even though they were at one time liberation. When you first learn about your type, the feeling is liberation. And then eventually, if you over-identify, you end up out of the pot and into the flame. You end up back into a prison. So what got you here won't get you there. And I think a person just needs to self-assess where they're at in that process. Are they still in that element of getting the most that they can out of identity and identifying with their type? Or are they ready now? Or are they hitting a law of diminishing returns and ready to, and usually a person can determine this because they want to abandon the systems altogether. Like if you're at a point where you're like, I don't know if I'm into this type thing anymore. That's usually when a person's actually ready to alter the relationship to the system. But they don't know that they can because most people are in that space of identification. Yeah. They don't know that the systems actually offer a relationship to them that isn't identification. It's the opposite of it.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision-making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action-focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show. What I hear you saying is instead of letting go of their over-identification of their personality, they trick themselves by letting go of the entire system. Because really what they're after is the over-identification. And the system itself, what I hear you saying is provides a map, like for example the Enneagram, toward essence, or Myers-Briggs toward wholeness, not one-sidedness.
Well, I don't think it's a self-trickery. I think it's that people don't talk about these systems in that way. Gotcha. And so people don't know that that's part of what's woven into them.
Gotcha.
Like the systems themselves, they're just systems. They're tools. It's how we use them that's important.
But if you don't know that that's available, if you don't know that the system, for example, Enneagram is about getting to essence and moving away from the passion, the fixations and all this, and in Myers-Briggs, it's about the wholeness, moving away from one-sidedness, your instinct is, well, I need to let the system go in order to do my instinctual thing toward wholeness or toward essence. But the tool itself has a map for this as well.
Yes, and I don't think a lot of people talk about it.
That's right.
And so, or at least those that do talk about it, it's a much quieter voice than the cacophony of all the over-identification content out there.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's any sort of trickery. I think the person just goes, well, how, like I think I'm done. I think I'm done over-identifying with my type, so I think I'm ready to move on. And moving on means moving past, all of these systems, which, by the way, can also be healthy. If you don't know that these are guides to also get past that piece, then it's better to let go of the tool than to stay in a place of imprisonment within the tool, for sure.
I want to use Enneagram Type 3 as a jumping off point here, just because I know it is a type that I think has a push-pull relationship with human being versus human doing. And type 3s tend to be human doings a lot. I want to just anchor that for a second because I'm working toward a point here. Another story, Dr. Dario Nardi was staying with us here at our home and studios for about a month when we were producing the Young on Yoga program with him. And we had this conversation where we were talking about how, personal growth and development actually, as you move that, through in your life, as you become more developed and you get more whole, as you get less one-sided and more whole, you actually lose some of your gumption, some of that motivation you were talking about earlier, Antonia. You really end up not having as much drive to prove yourself in the world, no matter what your personality type is. You lose some of the drive as you develop. You get more rested, and it takes a little bit of that motivation away. And I realized it really is a difference between human doing and human being. We have a tendency to be human doings, all of us, not just type 3s, but human doings, because we're driven to compensate for the things that we think are wrong about us, or we've got to fix, or we're covering over insecurities. So we do a lot. It doesn't just happen to type 3s. We all have this show up for us. We do. We're trying to make things happen and cover that and show the world we're good people and we can get it done and we've got all this. And as we work on ourselves and run out, we're like, well, there's not as much need for that proof anymore. I don't have to be a human doing so much. I can truly be a human being. And I've always heard this term, human doing versus human being. What does it mean to be a human being? Just be, whatever. But it's really becoming clear to me experientially what this actually means. A human being is someone who doesn't have to be a human doing and prove themselves and work with the insecurities and the self-identified deficiencies that they've got to hustle to make up for. They just can be who they are and be more rested in who they are as an actual person in their essence. And it does take away some of the motivation, because a lot of that motivation for that hustle comes from trying to cover for all those things that we're worried about. And I think that is such a powerful reframe in my mind, experiential reframe of what it really means to just be as a person. And I still, even when I say that, I still worry well, if I really get to that place in my life, am I going to lose the ability to do a lot of stuff? But I think if I get to the place where I lose the ability for all that motivation, it won't matter because I'll be rested in whatever I am at that moment. And I'm trusting the process as I go through it to say, maybe I don't need all the credit. Maybe I don't need to make all those things happen. Maybe I don't have to hustle to prove to myself and others that all these deficiencies I can see in myself are a problem and I got to overcompensate for them. Maybe I can just be who I am with all the flaws, all the imperfections, and all the amazingness too, and just exist in that space. And so that's become really clear to me, come into sharp relief after this Enneagram experience. And the other thing I think that really came into sharp relief that I noticed is developing specific with the Enneagram. Myers-Briggs might be a little different, but I'll just speak to the Enneagram. Because personality is who we are not. The identification with type 6 for myself, for example, that's not really who I am. I'm not an anxious, fearful person. In fact, I'm the exact opposite. I'm a courageous person who will run head first into battle or into the jungle to cut a new path. It's really not a matter of doing more things. Again, it's not a human doing activity. It's a human being. And what being a human being means is I start cutting things I'm doing. I stop doing things. It's about, I've worked my whole life for my control muscles to keep control of my world, of my relationships, of my businesses, of my projects. And that's me holding on. I've developed my control muscles, and I've seen success in my life by being a human doing and controlling my muscles, metaphorically. But when it starts to go toward the human being side of my true nature of courage, now I'll probably still do things, but really it's about exercising my release muscles. It's about letting go of things, letting go of the over-identification with my type, letting go of all the achievements that I think will help make up for my deficiencies, letting go of my image, my persona mask I wear, letting go of all the things I'm insecure about. And it's really a work of just getting past all of that because, in Enneagram theory, we're born into essence. We are complete and whole. I was born as the most courageous person I know. And over time, I started to hold on more and more to this persona, this mask of who I am. And I started to get more and more controlled and tighter grip. And there is usefulness in that. Like Antonia talked about, that identification part and achievement and all these things. This can be useful. But that's not the end of the story. And now the work, I think, is letting go of things, letting go and cutting out the stuff that's in the way of what my true essence is to show up to the world. It sounds terrifying. It sounds like I may not see the success that I want to have right now at this place in my life, but I do know that something about it is still calling me. There is that siren song that Antonia talked about. There's this appeal, this draw, this excitement to get back to who I truly am. But it's going to require me to let go of strategies that have gotten me to this place. And that can be kind of scary at times.
Yeah. The reason why I believe we let go of that ambition is because our personalities are effectively survival strategies. Like they're the things we think we must do or be in order to navigate the world. And that includes, Enneagram, it's very clear how that works. In Myers-Briggs, I think it's more like we're wired in certain ways, but then we double down on them because that wiring, those cognitive functions, my extroverted intuition exploration and my introverted thinking accuracy, man, have they helped me get through so many situations. They've also caused a lot of bad situations too, but I'm just going to ignore that, right? I'm just going to look at all the things they brought me. And so it's really easy to become one-sided or to double down, stay in your ego or in your persona or whatever, because it's how you survive, right? It's how I've navigated through everything. And I think as we let go of some of these survival strategies and realize that we're not, if we don't just be in these personalities and we don't just stay trapped and we stretch ourselves, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? It always feels regressive. It feels like, oh, I'm not going to get the things I want, or I'm not going to be able to achieve the things I want to achieve because I'm going through a time period where I'm discovering aspects of who I am that have been underutilized up to this point. They are skills I need to develop. And I'm now 44 years old. I want to see myself as complete or arrived, or I've built all the skills that I need to build. That's a little different than going, oh, I know everything. I think all of us go, I'm not perfect. I don't know everything. I still always have more to learn. But that whole phrase to me is starting to feel really hollow. I think when you get to a certain age, you believe you should you have everything you need to have in order to adult in a sufficient way. But we still double down on these old survival strategies. So stretching, becoming more of what I am in essence, discovering parts and elements and capacities within my ENTP type that allows me to not just double down on my top 2 functions, but also see other aspects and weave them in and create more of a choreographed dance with, the dynamics of all of these parts of who I am. It does feel regressive. It feels like I'm not getting that all of the positive, reflections of feedback that I once did, or I'm not seeing myself succeed like I am used to observing myself succeed. I'm watching myself regress. I'm watching myself go to a less sophisticated place. And that initial work does not feel good. It feels like you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. I think particularly when it comes to really intense trauma work. So we said that we describe a little bit of how that Enneagram workshop or the inner work retreat panned out. I don't really want to talk about that much because quite honestly, it's like Joel mentioned, it's highly experiential. But one of the things that got addressed, not with everybody, of all of the people that were there, not every single person did what I'm about to describe, but a handful did. And that was work on deep trauma, right? And there was 2 psychotherapists there to ensure that had they opened something up that was deep inner work that was associated with some pretty deep traumas, that they had qualified psychotherapists there to be able to help, counsel the person and guide them to a place where they were okay, which was very responsible on their part, in my opinion. But that deep trauma work, sometimes we are so locked into our personality because the deep trauma work or the deep trauma that we still hold that hasn't been worked on has put us in a feeling of survival all the time. And we don't know it's synthetic. We don't even know it's happening a lot of times. It's deeply unconscious. So there are a lot of individuals who are trapped in identification around type because that's their lifeline. That's their lifeline for dealing with this sense of, I have to survive, oftentimes due to trauma that has gone neglected. Or maybe just it's not been time. They're just not ready to face it yet. And yet it's a major leverage point. dealing with that trauma, healing it, doing really authentic trauma work, not just acknowledging that you may have been a victim in the past, but facing it directly and working it through. And that can sometimes talk about feeling regressive. When you're going through really deep trauma work, you feel like you're a little kid again, because that's oftentimes when the trauma happened, and you have to kind of go back and meet the trauma where it's at. And that feels massively regressive, and it doesn't feel like you're going to be able to survive the next day. Addressing a lot of that is a massive leverage point. And then when you get through that trauma work, all of the identification with type, if a person isn't dealing with unprocessed trauma, is a lot of times their strategy for creating a lifestyle that feels good to them, achieving, getting to a place of, I can do this, and this is my career path based on my type, and these are all the things I should be doing. I mean, Myers-Briggs or the MBTI has its roots in helping women find the skills that they were naturally good at to do job placement during World War II when men were off at war. So the Myers-Briggs indicator, the assessment itself, has its point of origin in what could be called achievement work. And it's been used that way for decades, right? That's why most people know of Myers-Briggs through a career application or a college, right, experience or whatever, because it's helping you try to figure out what your career is. And so it feels like being in personality when it comes to Myers-Briggs is really super helpful for how you're going to make your living, how you're going to create a lifestyle that suits your natural talents and your native wiring as you move through the world. And so Enneagram actually, what's interesting is Enneagram oftentimes will help us deal with our traumas, and Myers-Briggs will oftentimes help us deal, or healing, and Myers-Briggs will help us deal with our achievement. And then there's this whole thing called transcendence, right? That's the third leg of growth work, healing, achievement, and transcendence. We did a whole podcast on what we call the HAT model. And transcendence work doesn't mean letting go of these systems necessarily, although that can also be a way that it manifests. But transcendence work is realizing that once our healing work is complete, or at least complete for the moment, and our achievement work, we've done enough to be able to reflect back to ourselves some self-esteem, right? We've overcome obstacles. We've done the things that we need to do in order to go, you know what, I think I've got this handled, right? I can have self-confidence. I know that I'm worth something. I know I have value. I have watched myself achieve, and I have observed myself enough through all these contexts and situations that I have trust in my ability to navigate the world. The next leg of personal growth is transcendence work, which is, okay, now I can acknowledge I'm not my personality. I know that I can go to something that's higher, something that's more tapped into, like you mentioned, essence, something maybe even a little bit more spiritual. And that transcendence work will, just like healing work, will feel regressive because you're meeting it where it's at, and you have all this trauma, probably from childhood. Achievement work will sometimes make you feel regressive because now it blows a lid open on all these skills you need to develop in order to get what you want. It requires you to overcome all of these obstacles, and sometimes you'll fail, and that feels regressive. Transcendence work is the next phase. It can feel regressive when you're first starting out because now you're stretching beyond all the ways that you saw yourself originally to, navigate a space of who you quote unquote are not, right? But who you are, actually. At the end of the day, you're all these things. So it actually is who you are. It's the unnavigated portion of who you are. It's the part that you've been priming yourself this entire time to now go explore. And I think with all of this, it's not usually the conversation that happens in the typology world. It's not something that gets addressed a lot because the crunchy, popcorny, potato chip version of type, which is how each of the types pick their nose. It's like that's the thing that that's the thing that's so much more accessible, and most people are in that space of identity. But there is a way to use these tools powerfully in a way that's transcendent, that doesn't actually let go of their original wisdom for you. You don't have to let go of, quote unquote, being your type. You have to recognize that doesn't confine you. It doesn't bind you into that box. If you are in a box, you put yourself there. And for a time, as mentioned, when you first find type, the box is huge and it feels like liberation. But eventually you grow within the system and you grow within that description. And now suddenly the box feels confining. But it's not the system that did that. It's your relationship to the system that did that. And there are opportunities to continue to have a relationship with these systems that are transcendent relationships. And they go back to Enneagram essence work or Jung's one-sidedness and getting past shadow and ego and persona to find true self.
When we talk about personal growth, development, even understanding personality types, we're all on a timeline. We're all on our own individual timelines. So right now you're listening to us talk, and you might be at the same moment of the timeline that we're at, and you might be like really resonating with what we're saying. And be like, yes, Joel and Antonia, thank you for saying this. This is exactly what I've been thinking. You put some words to it, or you're saying what I've already heard, and I'm already on the path. That's really cool. Like I'm on the timeline with you guys. But you also might be someone listening right now, and you might be this person where you're saying, you guys, I don't really resonate with what you're saying. I maybe just came on to understand my personality type, either or Enneagram and or Myers-Briggs or another system. And I'm really in the midst of it right now. And I feel like I don't want to let that go. I'm trying to understand myself and learn how I can grow with that. Well, that's fine. Like that's good. You're on a timeline. Don't think you have to be on someone else's timeline. Be on your timeline. I think is the biggest message we want to leave you with at the end of this show is we're talking about some things that you may or may not be resonant with right now. But we are talking about things that I think are on a trajectory of time. And I'm really re-evaluating this idea of healing, healing, achievement, and transcendence in that, can you ever really be done with healing, right? Not really. Can you ever be done with achievement? Not really. Can you ever be done with transcendence? Not really. It's just like physical health. Like if you're working out and you're eating healthy, are you ever finished with that? Or is that like a lifestyle, a trajectory of a timeline into the future? I think when we're talking about personal growth and all these things, healing, achievement, and transcendence, we're talking about, are you on the trajectory that tomorrow you'll be further along than you were today? Are you on a lifestyle trajectory of these things? Are you on a movement of healing over time in your life? Are you in a movement of achievement over time? And are you in a movement of transcendence over time? And you're going to revisit each of these categories at different moments in the timeline for your life. Timelines matter. So identify where you're at on the timeline and know that the timeline continues to move into the future. So if you are thinking about your personality right now and you're just you're a consumer, you're consuming personality information, don't allow that to calcify. Don't allow it to be like, well, I'm this type and this is how I'm always going to be and I'm always wired this way. Leave room for the timeline of where you're going to be heading next. Don't box yourself in. Don't paint yourself into a corner. And if you're a typology leader, someone that creates content online and helps other people understand personality type, don't box in your content. Don't box in other people. Always, I mean, it's cool. Have your video of the 9 different Enneagram types doing underwater basket weaving, right? Like have the video where it showcases the funny little sketches where all 9 types are doing underwater basket weaving and how they show up, and it's kind of funny to identify with. But don't lock it in and calcify that to where you won't have room as you develop and grow your content to begin talking about some of these other elements. Don't box yourself in or paint yourself into a corner either, because I think on the timeline that is either content creation or learning, there are going to be other opportunities to involve yourself with these systems. So keep this flexible and open and realize where you're on the timeline and where you're headed. Yeah.
Although I was just thinking as you were mentioning that, Joel, or keep doing that because you'll probably get better ad revenue.
Well, well, yeah, if you're just doing it for the money, then probably stay with the popcorn stuff that doesn't have, I mean, you can box yourself into whatever that makes you the YouTube ad dollars, I guess. Right?
Yeah, because nobody wants to talk about transcending type. I mean, like, that's the whole point, right? Like, you get to a certain point and you're like, oh, I think I'm going to have to let go of some of this quote unquote achievement stuff because it's a conversation that's needed but not necessarily wanted. And when you make your listicle, just put a link to Personality Hacker in case anybody wants to go further. But keep your ad revenue.
Yeah, there you go. We do a 1-2 punch.
Because we get it. The more we talk about transcendence, we're like, I don't know if we're growing our audience right now.
I can tell you that the podcasts talking about this kind of stuff certainly do not perform as well as like a more, I think it's just accessibility too. You have a wider audience that doesn't have as much reference to pull from. And so when you talk about more, how ENFPs show up in the world or whatever, like I think people can resonate with that more because people are busy. They're not sitting there and really going deep into the systems.
Yeah.
And so there's not, from a business standpoint, I'm not suggesting you go down the road of talking about deeper things because that may not equal bottom line for you.
and leave these conversations to people like us who are like, we'll just eat it. We'll just eat it.
So, all right. So you've been here with us. You've been hanging out with me and Antonia for this conversation. You haven't had a microphone, though. You've just been listening. But what do you think? We want to hear from you. If you want to make a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your personal story, maybe your own journey, your own timeline, how you access and show up to these systems, come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, make your voice heard. We want to hear what you have to say about what we're talking about.
You can't hear it, but I've been choking. So my voice is going to be all scraggly for this ending. My apologies. I just ended up coughing up.
We do it. We do a quick edit point while you just like hacked a lung up.
That's right. So anyway, let's see if I can get through this ending. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating review on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. Actually, I haven't gotten a review in a little while, and I'm missing them. Could somebody do that for me? Would you do me a favor and go leave a rating and review? It can be a bad one if you want to, but only leave a good one. If you're the kind of person who likes what we're doing, do Antonia Dodge a favor and go leave a rating and review on iTunes, because it when I say it helps us out a lot, what I really mean is that helps my soul out a lot.
Well, it's motivating to you, right?
Right, even though I'm not supposed to be motivated by feedback anymore as the three.
Yeah, but I mean, we're human. You're all going to be like, you're still going to see it and be like, oh, I'm excited. People are listening. They're responding. I want to keep going.
That's true. I can't let go of that
encouragement.
humanness.
It's encouragement.
It's encouragement. Would you go encourage me as the three that's supposed to be above all this? And leave a rating and review on iTunes. We also have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot.
You know, I want to say something about the book. We were just interviewed on another podcast earlier today, and someone said, where can I learn more about personality type and cognitive functions and stuff? And I thought, we talked about the book, and I realized, why don't we talk about this book more often? It really is a good resource and a really good guide. In the Myers-Briggs system, if you want to understand how the 4-letter code that you have as a personality points to how your mind is wired, and in general, the system itself, it's a workbook. It walks you through understanding the system piece by piece, and then has portions of it for you to journal and reflect on what you're learning to test your knowledge. It's a great way to learn the system at a basic level, and it's like a few bucks on Amazon. Like, it's a really great starting point for anyone, and it's a good gift. I mean, time of this recording, holidays are coming and things, so think about maybe gifting this to somebody else to understand themselves. We should probably highlight this book more often and talk about the characteristics in it. And then there's a chapter for each of the personality types in the Myers-Briggs system, breaking down how you're wired, and also a growth strategy and some of the things like loops and grips and things to avoid.
Yeah. Well, and it's over 400 pages, and it's like less than $15. So
our publisher was like, cut material, don't make it so long. So we tried to pack as much as we could in without getting in trouble with our publisher.
Yeah, I think 400 pages is respectable, though, right?
It was like 600 and some when we first wrote it.
I know, it's terrible. It was terrible. But it landed at over 400 pages, and it's under $15 on Amazon. So go get a copy. It's a good one.
But I think I'm going to start talking up the book a little bit more, because I think it's a really great resource.
Yep. We also have other great resources. We create programs and personal growth programs through the lens of personality type. You can go to personalityhacker.com, and under our catalog, you'll find a suite of programs that are made just for you, tailor-made for your personality type. So go check them out. And am I supposed to say anything else? That hacking really messed with my mind grapes.
I don't think so. I think you did all the
I covered it. I covered everything, right?
Your Enneagram 3 is approved of.
Yeah.
You did all the right social and outward things.
Thanks for the feedback. My 3 appreciates it.
Yeah, so my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning. We are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.